The sound came just after midnight, a metallic rattle against the lock of my bedroom door that sliced through my sleep. I shot up in bed, my heart instantly hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Before my mind could even process the noise, the door flew open with a bang, crashing against the wall. Mom's shape stood in the doorway, a dark, sharp silhouette cut out by the pale yellow light from the hallway. Her shadow stretched long and menacing across my floor, a predator's warning. "Get up," she snarled, her voice a low growl that held no warmth, no motherly tone. I blinked, rubbing the sleep from my eyes, my brain still thick and slow. "What, Mom, what's going on?" "It's the middle of the night," I mumbled, my voice karaoke in a flash. She was on me. The blanket was ripped away, the cold air hitting my skin like a slap. Her fingers, strong and unforgiving, closed around my wrist, her nails digging into my flesh as she hauled me out of bed. "Did you not hear me?" she hissed, her face close to mine. "You think lying around here makes you part of this family? You are nothing but a stray mutt we've been foolish enough to feed for this long. It's over." I stumbled, my legs weak and uncoordinated from sleep, but her grip was like iron. She dragged me from my room and down the hall, my bare feet scraping and catching on the old wooden floorboards. I saw my father leaning casually against the wall, by the front door, his arms crossed over his chest, a cruel, satisfied smirk playing on his lips. Finally, he muttered, his voice dripping with disdain. "About time she learned her place in this world, which is nowhere." From the living room, my sister, Rachel, emerged, the blue light of her phone screen illuminating her gleeful face. She was already recording. A small, high-pitched giggle escaped her lips. "Oh my God, this is priceless," she said, her eyes wide with excitement. "Mom, make her crawl. Seriously, make her do it." I tried to pull back, a surge of panic and adrenaline finally waking me completely. "No, please, stop," I begged, but Mom's strength was terrifying, fueled by a rage I couldn't comprehend. She didn't let go. She tightened her grip and shoved me toward the front door. Dad opened it without a word, stepping aside to let her push me out into the biting night air. The porch light above buzzed loudly, a single, indifferent witness to my complete and utter humiliation. She shoved me again, this time off the porch. I tumbled forward, landing hard on the rough concrete of the driveway. A searing pain shot through my knees as the jagged surface tore at my skin. "Beg," Mom hissed, standing over me, a queen surveying a conquered peasant. "Beg like the pathetic dog you are." My throat felt like it was closing up. I couldn't get enough air. Tears burned in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "Mom, please," I whispered, the words barely audible. Her laughter was sharp and ugly, splitting the quiet of the suburban night. "Hear that?" she called over her shoulder to Dad, who was now standing on the porch with Rachel. "She's finally saying, please." Dad stepped forward, shaking his head with a look of fake disappointment. "Pathetic," he spat. "We should have thrown you out years and years ago. All that wasted money." Rachel's phone was still pointed at me, its small lens glowing like a malevolent red eye, capturing every tremble, every scraped knee, every ounce of my shame. "Say it louder," she taunted, her voice light and sing-song. "Come on, bark if you want to come back inside. Bark for us." I could barely breathe. My hands were pressed flat against the cold, gritty concrete, trying to ground myself. The windows of the neighboring houses were dark, silent squares in the night, but I was certain they were all watching. I felt a million unseen eyes on me. I looked up at the three of them, my mother, my father, my sister, my family, my blood. And I felt something deep inside me splinter and crack, a foundational piece of my soul, shattering into 1,000 tiny shards. Their laughter, their smirks. Rachel's phone recording it all, every single detail carved itself into my mind. Not as a memory, but as a brand. They thought they had broken me that night. But as I sat there shivering on the curb, my arms wrapped tightly around myself for a warmth that wasn't there, I made a silent, solemn promise. One day, I would make them remember these exact words, this exact feeling. One day, the ones who forced me to beg would be the ones down on their knees. And when that night finally came, I wouldn't just giggle quietly. I would make sure the entire world heard them choke on their own pathetic pleas. The hours that followed that night blurred into a long, cold silence. I remained on the curb, long after the porch light finally clicked off, long after Rachel's mocking laughter faded inside, long after my body went from shivering to a deep, profound numbness. A part of me thought about knocking, about crawling back to the door and doing exactly as they asked. But the echo of my mother's words, "Beg like the dog you are," chained me to the street. When the first hint of dawn painted the sky in shades of gray and pale pink, I finally picked myself up. I brushed the dirt and pebbles from my scraped legs and started walking with no destination in mind. My stomach was a hollow, aching pit, and my throat burned with thirst. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the agony of knowing that, to them, I no longer existed. They had locked the door, turned off the lights, and gone to bed as if they had just taken out the trash. For days, I was a ghost. I drifted through the city, invisible. The first night, I found shelter in the back of a closed laundromat, using my thin jacket as a pillow, the smell of bleach and old soap clinging to me. The second, I dozed on a hard plastic bench under the buzzing fluorescent lights of a bus station, jumping at every sound. People looked right past me, their eyes sliding through me as if I were made of glass. I was the ghost they all pretended not to see. I finally found work at a rundown, 24-hour diner. The owner, a tired-looking man named Sal, saw me staring at the faded "Help Wanted" sign in the window for nearly an hour. He must have seen the desperation in my eyes. The pay was barely enough to survive, and the shifts were endless, but it meant food and a roof over my head in a tiny room I rented by the week. I scrubbed dishes until my hands were raw and cracked. I wiped down sticky tables until my back screamed in protest. I carried heavy trays of food, forcing a smile onto my face for customers who didn't know, and wouldn't care, that I was carrying a weight far heavier than their plates. Each night after my shift, I would walk back to my room, passing houses that glowed with warm light. Through their windows, I could see families laughing around dinner tables. I would think of my parents, sitting smugly in their comfortable living room. I imagined Rachel replaying that horrible video of me on the pavement, showing it to her friends like it was a hilarious comedy clip. The thought made my chest burn with a fire hotter than any hunger I had ever felt. I started writing again. In a cheap, battered notebook from the corner store, I poured out every single detail of that night, every cruel word, every mocking laugh, every stinging insult. It wasn't just to help me cope. It was evidence. It was a record. These were the seeds of my revenge. Weeks turned into months, and months turned into a year. I learned how to survive, on my own, but more importantly, I learned how they lived without me. Rachel's social media was a goldmine of arrogance. There were videos of her showing off new clothes, pictures of my dad flashing wads of cash at a neighborhood barbecue, and posts from my mom flaunting new jewelry that I knew, deep down, they couldn't possibly afford. They weren't hiding their lifestyle at all. They thought they had erased me so completely that I could never, ever matter again. But erasing me had lit a fire. I took on double shifts, saving every single dollar I didn't need for rent or food. I enrolled in night classes at a community college, studying bookkeeping and basic finance. I learned about taxes, loans, interest rates, and debt, all the boring adult things they had always ignored because they believed their charm and social status could keep their perfect world afloat forever. I started to see the cracks in their perfect facade. Their life wasn't perfect at all. It was a house of cards. Dad was missing payments on his business loans. Mom was secretly pawning the very jewelry she flaunted online. Rachel, in her quest to look popular and rich, had signed her name on things she didn't understand, racking up incredible credit card debt. And me, the daughter they had dragged into the street and treated like trash. I had knowledge now. I had the one thing they always mocked me for: patience. Every insult they had ever thrown at me became a mantra, replaying in my head as I worked. "Beg like the dog you are." I repeated it as I folded my cash tips into a savings envelope. "Crawl on your knees." I repeated it as I studied by the dim light of a cheap lamp until my eyes stung with exhaustion. "Pathetic." I repeated it when my body ached and my spirit wavered. When I felt like I just wanted to quit. Slowly, a vision began to form in my mind, crystal clear. I didn't want to hurt them physically. That would be too quick, too easy. No, I wanted them to feel exactly what I felt that night: powerless, exposed, humiliated, and utterly desperate. I wanted them on their knees. The girl shivering on the curb was gone. In her place was someone sharper, colder, and stronger. Someone who wasn't just going to survive them. I was going to make them beg by the time I turned 22. The girl who was shoved onto the pavement was unrecognizable. I had a substantial amount of savings in the bank, a steady bookkeeping job for a small firm, and the kind of fierce independence my parents had sworn I would never have. But I never let myself forget. I carried the memory of that night, not as a wound, but as a scar stitched across my soul, a permanent reminder of my purpose. I kept watching them, quietly and patiently. Their beautiful facade was cracking even faster than I had expected. Dad's business was crumbling under the weight of unpaid taxes and loans he could no longer cover. Mom, who so loved to flash her jewelry at her friends, was pawning pieces faster than she could brag about them. And Rachel, spoiled and clueless as ever, had racked up so much debt that collection agencies had started calling. And still, they laughed at others. Still, they walked around town like they were kings and queens, better than everyone else. That was when I knew the time was perfect. One night, I left thick, heavy envelopes on their doorstep. I also sent them to their neighbors, members of their church group, and even my dad's last few business partners. Inside were pristine, undeniable copies of every debt, every foreclosure warning, every unpaid bill, every public record of their financial ruin. I didn't sign my name. I didn't need to. The truth spoke far louder than my name ever could. Within days, the whispers in town turned into cold stares. Social invitations stopped coming. Mom's friends stopped calling her back. Dad's business partners officially pulled out, leaving his company to collapse. Rachel's credit line was frozen, and the dealership repossessed her car. The family that had dragged me into the street to be the town's joke had now become the town's joke themselves. But I wasn't done. The final step had to be face-to-face. I waited until the bank's final repossession notice was taped to their front door, the one that meant they had 30 days before they lost the house for good. Then, I walked back to that house, the same one they had shoved me out of like a piece of garbage. I let myself in. The living room was dark and messy, papers strewn across every surface. Their faces, illuminated by a single lamp, were pale and gaunt with desperation. Dad looked older, smaller. Mom's eyes were red and bloodshot from crying. Rachel was curled up on the couch, her phone dark in her lap. For once, they all froze when they saw me standing in the doorway. Dad's jaw clenched. "What are you doing here?" he growled. I stepped inside, my movements calm and deliberate. "I'm just making sure you remember." Mom sneered, but her voice cracked with fear. "We don't need anything from you." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a single, crisp $5 bill, the same way they had once shoved one into my hand, telling me it was all I was worth. I let it flutter from my fingers onto the table, where it landed on a pile of overdue bills. $5, I said, my voice soft but carrying across the silent room. "That's what you thought I was worth. That's what you gave me the night you threw me out onto the street." Rachel shifted uncomfortably, whispering, "It was a joke." My gaze snapped to her, hard and cold, and she flinched. "A joke? Watching me beg in the cold? Recording it for your own entertainment? Tell me, Rachel, is it still funny now?" Silence. Thick, heavy silence. I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a low, sharp whisper that cut through the tension. "You told me to beg like a dog. Well, look at you now. On the very edge of losing everything. And I am not the one on my knees." My mother's lip trembled. My father finally broke, slamming his fist on the table with a loud thud that made them all jump. "Fine. You want us to beg? Is that what you came here for?" I stared at him, my expression unblinking. "No. I didn't come for your words. I came to watch you crawl." And over the following weeks, that's exactly what they did. They called me. They texted me. They even showed up at the diner where I worked, pleading for help, for money, for a place to stay. They offered pathetic apologies, flimsy excuses, and empty promises. Every single time, I calmly reminded them of that night. Of their laughter. Of their cruelty. Of their command for me to beg. And every single time, I turned my back and walked away. The last time I saw them together, they were standing on the lawn outside their empty house, the foreclosure papers taped to the front door, their belongings piled in boxes on the curb. Mom was clutching Rachel's arm as if she might collapse. Dad was hunched over, all his pride and arrogance gone, leaving only a hollowed-out shell of a man. They looked up as I walked by on the opposite side of the street, their eyes wild with a final, desperate plea. "Please," Dad rasped, his voice carrying across the quiet street. "Help us." I stopped. I let the silence stretch out, letting them hang in that last thread of hope. Then, I spoke the words they had once spat at me like venom, returning them with cold, perfect clarity. Big like the dogs you are. Their faces crumpled. Their pride shattered into nothingness. And I turned and walked away, my head held high, the pavement solid beneath my feet. Finally, truly free. They had thought I would always be the one on the ground looking up, but in the end, I was the one left standing tall. And they were the ones left in the dirt, begging.